Hi, this is Mike Baio with Banger Inc. In this session, we're going to continue along with the Sage Intacct Advanced Sales Tax Setup, and we're going to talk specifically about the areas of what we call the shared setup across modules. So one of the first areas you need to go in and set up when getting your sales tax created inside Sage Intacct is we need to create what we call contact tax groups. And then we need to go in and create our item tax groups and then any tax authorities that we have in the system. So what we're going to do is we're going to go in and create our contact tax groups first. Now, I'm going to jump over to the Intacct software and we'll go right into it. And your contact tax groups are going to be stored directly in the company application. So first few times you start going into this, just from my experience, you're going to want to try and go into order entry or purchasing because that's where you see all this tax information. And in fact, you're not going to find what you need here because those contact tax items, because they're a contact related setup, they're actually going to be in the company module under setup and you want to be at the top level. So set this up at the top level, company setup. And then you're going to go over to here under settings and you're going to see contact tax groups. And you'll see that I have some already set up in the system. Now, these, as far as the setup, it's very simple. You're really just clicking add and you're keying in a name. And this is the name of the contact tax group. But you don't just want to go ahead and do it. You want to have some thought into this and lay out a list as to how you want to track these contact tax groups. So to give you an example here, maybe you have one rate of tax and you just need to track it. It's statewide. You don't get into any other states. You can simply have a tax group called 7% tax. If you need to track it in more detail, you need to track it by the county, whether it's exempt or not. You can have different IDs here for the different scenarios that a contact or location may have as far as tracking tax. So for example, if charging tax to my customers, when I set up that customer, when I set up that project, I'm going to set up the contact to be tied to a specific area. So in this case, I'm using Iowa and I want to break it out because the sales tax is broken out by county. So you might want to put a county ID in the name here. And also if you get into multiple states, I usually recommend breaking out the state first and then the county afterwards to kind of put them all, group them together and just make it easier for reporting. It's whatever you're used to doing and you're going to have to take some time and plan that out a little bit, set a few up, test them out in the testing environment, especially during the deployment phase. So in this scenario, I've set up one for this county in Iowa, Johnson County, Des Moines, but then I've also set up another ID because some of the areas still in the Des Moines County might be exempt. So what determines that we're going to set up later. But what I want to do here is set up all my different options as far as what somebody or a customer might be in a particular scenario. So in this case, I would set up all the counties that I possibly need. You don't have to set up all the counties if you know you're not doing work in that county. And you can easily duplicate these and set them up as you go. But really, there's not much to them here. As far as setup, you're going to put in a description. So I have one here for Iowa Des Moines and Iowa exempt Des Moines. So I have some different options here in the setup. So you're going to go ahead and create these first step. And the next step is when we go to generate an invoice or put a charge in for an accounts payable bill, the way the construction subscription is set up is you're always going to use an item. So we use the items inside Intacct to determine whether it should be, let's say, taxable or not. So even if you're in Iowa and it's Des Moines, we can also say, well, if it's this type of item, if it's this type of bill, this product is not taxable. So again, in prior videos, we've used the labor versus material. You might have one customer when you're invoicing them. If you're billing them for material, it's taxable, but if you're billing them for labor, it's not. So again, at top level, if we go over in this case to shared item list, well, let's go to order entry and let's go to set up items. You'll notice here we have some sample items. So if you're billing in detail, material, you'd come in and fill it out for each one of your items in the material. But in this case, I'm just going to go to some simple items I have set up. For example, I have one called material, one called labor. You'll see another example here of taxable material versus non-taxable material. So you can have two different items based on if it's taxable or not. But inside that item, if I go into labor, for example, you're going to see what's called a item tax group. And this is what we're talking about setting up here. We're talking about setting up this list right here. Now you can get to it right from within the item. Under the sales section, you have an item tax group, and you could specifically just come into here and hit add and add your own to the list. You can also get to them from within any of the item areas in the system. So that would be like order entry, purchasing has items, and I do believe even item groups, but that's it. So you're pretty typically going to go into order entry and purchasing. And under the setup, you're going to see under items, you're going to see your item tax groups. So again, if I click my list, I set up one called non-taxable, one called taxable. You might have another one in the later section. We're going to talk about setting up use tax. We're going to have it set up as use taxable. So you can have any different types of criteria, maybe capital improvement, any type of groups that you want here. But for simplicity purpose, hey, this item's either going to be taxable or it's going to be non-taxable. So again, add, very simple list, but you want to kind of plan out that mapping and, all right, what do I need here? So I need two different items, taxable, non-taxable. And then what you're going to need to do is go through your item list. So for order entry, items, however you bill. So you'll notice here, there's out of the box for construction, there is some contract line items like contract price. Any one of these you can come into in the item and hit edit. And down at the bottom here, two different areas. Now, you're going to want to say, what's the item tax group? This case, taxable. And is it taxable? Okay. Now, just because we say this is taxable and we give it an item tax group of taxable doesn't mean tax is going to be charged, because there's a bigger schedule mapping here, because we could say, back from our first step, it's Iowa exempt and it's taxable. Well, that's still going to be 0. Okay. So just because it's taxable and the item tax group is set up as taxable doesn't mean it's going to be charged tax. And any item that you want to calculate your schedules off, whether that does return a 0 value, you do need to have it checked off as taxable here. So for example, if I look at that labor one, I can say it's non-taxable and then it's unchecked, right? Because it's actually going to be non-taxable. Okay. But for all my material ones, all of that, we're going to set those up. So any item that you're going to use to generate a construction bill or put in through the cost side, you need to establish whether it's taxable or not. And that's going to reflect it on both the cost side and the sales side. So here's your cost types, which are tied to your items. So for equipment, is equipment taxable on the AP side? And I don't have that set up at this time. I only have it set up to track the receivable side of it. Okay, so you're going to want to do this if you're tracking it for both sides. So after you've established your contact tax groups, your item tax groups, and you've coded them to your items, the last step that you're going to do in the shared configuration is you're going to go into your order entry or purchasing again. The authorities are shared across. So if I'm in order entry here, setup, taxes, you see authorities. Now I have some setups, so I'll click on them and you'll see I have Oregon, state of Iowa, state of Missouri. If I go over to purchasing and I go to setup and I go to authorities, it's the same list. That's the shared setup. Okay. Okay, so let's go into the state of Iowa. So to create a new authority, you're going to click Add, and you're going to give it a name, a description, and you're going to link it to the vendor. There's your vendor list here. So basically, just to kind of make a note, if you get to the point where you set up your tax authority and you don't have a vendor to link it to yet, make sure you set up the vendor through accounts payable under the normal setup vendor process. So if I come into here and let's just take a look at the state of Iowa. So we call the state of Iowa, we coded it to the vendor state of Iowa. And if I go look at that vendor, I'll click view here. That vendor can be specifically tied to a general ledger account in the system. Oops, sorry. Actually, we'll do that on the details. Sorry about that. So that you want to make sure you have your state of Iowa set up, and then you can do your ACH payments if it's via ACH and all that good stuff. So basically, the tax authority is going to say, hey, where do these group up to so that we can report on this by the state and pay it by the state for all the different counties. So you want to make sure that you have each of your tax authorities set up because they're going to be needed when we get into the next steps in the module-specific setup. Okay, so basically once you've set up let's go back to our PowerPoint here. So once you've set up your shared settings, you've set up your contact tax groups, your item tax groups, link them to items, and then set up your tax authorities, we're ready for the next steps. So if you have any questions or comments on this session of the videos, please list them and then like and subscribe as always. We'll talk to you in the next session.